Thank you very much. My name is Jim Kalbach. I'm the head of customer experience at Mural, one of the sponsors down there at the bottom. And we are Mode Shift, that's the name of this group, with Daniel Mester on tenor saxophone. Daniel Mester. On guitar, Dave Lamb. Hi, Dave. And Adam Klaus on drums. There you go. That tune we just played is called All Blues. It's written by Miles Davis. And that comes from his album Kind of Blue, the most popular and best-selling jazz album of all time. And if you don't know Kind of Blue, I recommend you check it out. Even if you don't like jazz, you will probably like this album. So go listen to Kind of Blue. And there's an interesting backstory to the recording of this album. Miles Davis was famous for giving very little instruction to the musicians before they recorded because he wanted a lot of spontaneity, something that's key to jazz improvisation. And for this particular session, he didn't even give the musicians the music beforehand. So they hadn't rehearsed. They hadn't played the songs together. They warmed up a little bit, but they hadn't really played them together. And with only one exception, the first complete take of each song, the first time they made it through the end of the song and recorded it, that's what got pressed on the album. So we have to ask ourselves, how is this possible that a group of human beings can come together and so spontaneously create great music? So what I'd like to do here today is use what's going on up on stage as a metaphor, an analogy for you with your teams and team collaboration. And that song right there, All Blues, that was the first time that we ever played a song together. So we just met this afternoon a couple of hours ago for the first time. I live just outside of New York City. They're from Budapest. And other than a quick sound check, that was the first piece of music that we ever played together. That was pretty good. So thanks, guys. Yeah. So again, how is that possible? How is that possible? It's kind of amazing, but if we break it down and unpack it, there's lots of things going on there. Empathy and trust and structure, there's lots of things. I just want to talk about three specific aspects that I think are core for jazz improvisation. First is focusing on the outcome, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but basically we're working with each other for a certain result, and we have that result in mind. Planning for uncertainty, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's really embracing the fact that we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but that's okay. Because our patterns and our systems are going to get us through it. We put trust into our patterns and our system. And that's the last point I want to talk about, patterns of engagement, rules of engagement. So I'd like to talk about each one of those, and we're going to play a little more music in between. Is that okay? Okay, great. Let me take these in reverse chronological order. I'm going to take patterns of engagement first and break that down. There are lots of patterns. Contrary to popular belief, jazz musicians aren't just playing whatever they feel. Right? We're not just making up every aspect of we're improvising, but we're not making it up. In fact, there's lots of rules and conventions and maxims, and even standards, things that are immutable. And one of the things that kind of is a ground layer, foundational aspect of jazz improvisation that almost never changes, or very rarely changes, at least in the type of jazz we just played, is the form of a tune. And I'll talk a little bit more about the form of a tune. But our friend here, Professor Dizzy Gillespie, is going to help us understand jazz. Have you ever seen this photo before, guys? It's a good photo. So jazz equals, we play the head, I solo, you solo, we play the head, yeah, man. And how many times a night do you guys do that? Most of the night. This is what they're doing. We play the head, I solo, you solo, we play the head, yeah, man. So let's break that down and look at that in a little bit more detail. So the song that we just played has what's called a blues form. It has 12 bars, or 12 measures, each with 4 beats. And on top of that is the melody, and accompanying that is harmony, right? So we have rhythm, time, we have a melody, and we have a harmony. And that's across 12 bars. So we have 12 measures that form a unit, that forms a unit. And we call that a chorus, right? And the first time we played it, we played the melody along with that chorus, and then the second time we also played the melody. But then after that, the rhythm section, that's the 3 of us, we kept playing the harmony, but instead of the soloist then improvised the melody on top of that. So you can think of a jazz improvisation like a melody on top of the same chords that they played over the head or the top of the form. And then we repeat that n number of times. You just kind of look at each other when you're done. But a solo always starts at the beginning of that form and ends at the end of the form. So when we get to the end of the form, we kind of look at each other. Is he going to take another chorus? And yeah, okay, he's going to take another chorus. And then when the soloist is done, they hand it over, and the next soloist does that. Right? And then at the very end, we play that form with the melody again, and that's the head. Right? So this is the underlying structure of jazz in a nutshell. And if we get lost, we're all going to try to find this form again and orient ourselves to this form. And believe it or not, even though this is immutable, it's something that you don't alter this, that because of that, you have a lot of freedom on top of it, because you can orient yourself to this underlying structure. And if you think about it, it's kind of like a sprint, right? So we take this bigger thing, like a song, and we break it down into small parts, and we iterate on that. So if we mess up one iteration, guess what? It doesn't matter. You got another chance to try your solo the next time around. So the form of a tune is very, very important. There are other rules around harmony. There are other rules around melody as well, too. I should say more patterns. There's a lot of patterns. We just talked about systems and things like that. Jazz improvisation is made up of a lot of systems, right? So Jessamina was just talking about having the foundation with the room for variation. I think that's what she shared foundation. So this is our we have a very, very strong shared foundation. It is so strong that I can fly from New York to Budapest and find 3 guys that know exactly the same language. Or in Sofia, Bulgaria, where I've also given this talk. Or I could go to Kuala Lumpur. You guys ever play in Asia or anywhere? Kuala Lumpur or Sydney, Australia? Have you played there before? Not in Asia. There you go, in Middle East, yeah. We had a gig there with And did they go head, solo, head? Absolutely. Yeah, man? Yeah. There you go. Same thing. So improvisation relies heavily on having that structure. And Nihan, she was talking about, and if you listen to her talk, the second one yesterday, she was talking a lot about expectations. When you sit down with your team, make sure you have the same expectations. We have the same expectations here. And we have a lot of the same history. Because we've all heard Kind of Blue hundreds of times. How many times have you heard Kind of Blue? Maybe hundreds. How many times have you played that song? This one? Yeah. Hundreds. Hundreds of times, yeah. So we know that. So we're going to play a song by Dizzy Gillespie, gentleman I was just talking about, called Burke's Works. And it has 12 bars to it. Here's the sheet music for it. It has 12 bars. We're going to start at the top, play the melody twice, and then we're just going to keep going through that form. So when one soloist ends and the other one begins, you know we're at the beginning of the form again. Does anybody know how this song goes? Does anybody know how this song goes? Does anybody know Burke's Works? Do you know how it goes? You all know how it goes. We're going to play the head. He's going to solo. He's going to solo. I'm going to solo. He's going to solo. We're going to play the head. Yeah, man. Can I get a yeah, man? Okay, there you go. So let's try Burke's Works, okay, guys? Yeah, man. You might have noticed there were a few more notes for those of you who can read music, but even if you don't read music. There were a lot more notes than what we played from this sheet, but that's all we're given, because all we need is what's the form, how many measures, what's the melody, and what are the chords. And the rest of it is improvised. And this thing right here, it's called it comes from a fake book or a fake sheet, because we're faking it. The rest of it's faked or improvised. Fake has a negative connotation, so we say improvised. It's creative. Lots of rules. Just one quick observation. We did something there called fours, where the form always stayed the same. And then David played 4 measures of a solo, and the next 4 measures we dropped out, and that was the drum solo. And then we played 4 measures solo, 4 measures drum, and we went back and forth. Did you hear how we went back and forth there? We didn't rehearse that. We didn't rehearse any of this. How did we know how to do that? Because there's this convention out there. There's this pattern, rules of engagement. There's this thing called fours. And before we got on stage, I said, let's do fours in Burke's Works. And everybody went, okay, let's do fours. Because we all know what fours are. So once you have the language, and we were talking about design systems, is that you want that foundation. And once you have that language, you can play around with it, and you can do different things with it very, very easily. So rules give us the freedom to improvise, and rules of engagement give us the freedom to improvise. I want to move on a little bit. Herbie Hancock, one of the most famous jazz pianists alive today, he writes in his autobiography in 2014, he tried to write his life story in a book, an autobiography. And the very first page, the very first story that he tells, he's playing on stage. He's 24 years old, just at the start of his career, playing with Miles Davis in the Miles Davis Band in Stockholm. So he's playing with the most famous and leading jazz musician of the time, and maybe of all times. And they're playing his song, and this is what he describes in the opening paragraphs of his autobiography. They're playing this song, and right before they get to the solos, kind of right at the high point, he plays a wrong chord. He plays a wrong chord, and he thinks, Miles is going to kill me, and I'm never going to be able to play with Miles Davis again, right? Because Miles Davis is up in the stratosphere, and he's a young, getting started in his career. Instead, though, Miles played a note, or some notes, that made his chord sound right. Right? So that thing that was wrong, in retrospect, after you play some other notes around it, you can make that sound right. And then Herbie Hancock, in his autobiography, goes on to, wonder with amazement. What is this music? What is this jazz improvisation that allows somebody to make a mistake and other people come in and correct it and make it sound like it was intentional and even good? So there's this rule, there's this thing in jazz music that there's no such thing as a mistake, only missed opportunities. There's no mistakes, only missed opportunities, right? So I want you to think about that in your own work. People are pulling apart your designs and things like that. Maybe those are opportunities, right? But the only way that can happen, the only way that a mistake can become an opportunity is if you're listening to each other. And jazz musicians talk about having big ears. In English, do you say big ears too in Hungarian? Have you ever heard the phrase big ears? Not really? You haven't heard that phrase? A lot of at least in the United States, big ears. And if somebody says big ears to you, that means you weren't listening. It's basically a polite way of saying listen to the rest of the band. But having big ears or listening, you want to listen more to the band than you're listening to yourself, right? So having a command of your instrument is key so that you can listen to everything else that's going on. And you take that in real time. Now, we have a really big advantage when we're playing music, and that everything is 100% transparent. Because I can hear everything that everybody's doing every second of the song. When we're doing our design works, there's times when you're working alone or in a small team and then in a big team. So you have to work hard towards transparency, right? And I like to do what some people call working out loud. Working out loud. Sharing your designs, being open for critique. listening to each other as much as possible. And I think with design, we have to work extra hard for that, to work out loud. Anytime we play, we're working out loud by default. But by listening, then we can react. We can react to each other. And we can play off of each other. And something that David plays, maybe I integrate in my solo, or a mistake that Daniel makes, maybe that becomes something that we all embrace, right? So we're embracing uncertainty. We're planning for uncertainty, and that's okay. So we're going to play a song by Herbie Hancock now called Watermelon Man, and maybe we'll play some wrong notes and see what happens. You can count on that, he said. So we'll see what we make out of it, though. So here's Herbie Hancock's Watermelon Man. Didn't sound like a lot of wrong notes coming out of those two, did it? A lot of right notes over there, I would say. Maybe I'll give you guys another chance to make a mistake next tune. How's that? Okay. Good. Herbie Hancock's Watermelon Man. There you go. So embracing uncertainty, or planning for uncertainty, something that Herbie Hancock talked about, something fundamental for improvisation. You need the structure, you need the shared foundation, and the rules and conventions to be able to improvise, to be able to come up with something unique and new. But I think you also need a common purpose, focus on an outcome, to focus on the same outcome. We talk a lot about empowering teams, right? Have you heard of the two-pizza team concept? Do you know what a two-pizza team is? Well, these are American pizzas. You ever seen a big American pizzas that have slices and they slice them up? There's like 8 slices. So you want your teams to be about the size that you can feed with 2 pizzas, right? So you want small teams, but you want them to be empowered, right? So we talk about agile teams, we talk about empowered teams. You can't be empowered if you don't have the structure first, but I think you also have to have the same purpose. You have to have the same kind of vision of what the outcome is. Now, these are songs that we've all played together before. Not together, but we've heard these songs. So I think we kind of have a template in our mind what could be a good version of that last song that we just played. This is Art Blakey here, the picture here, Art Blakey. And he was famous for bringing bands together, bringing young musicians together. They almost had this university or institution where young musicians would come through and then they would graduate and have their own careers, like Wayne Shorter and Wynton Marsalis and Lee Morgan and lots of other people that played with him. So he's the band leader. He's the leader of the band. And because he was playing drums, he was literally sitting in the back. And how do you lead from behind? And he wasn't out front directing them like an orchestra conductor would do. He was giving them a purpose and a shared outcome, the intent of the song, and then letting them improvise on top of that, but providing the backbone from the back. So he's leading from behind. But empowerment and leading from behind, you can't have that unless you have the same outcome, the same vision. So start with the outcome. Make sure you have that shared purpose. And again, I think Nihan was talking a little bit about this, sitting down with your teams and not only doing breathing exercises and setting expectations, but agreeing on the outcomes. And if you have a strong sense of outcome, then lots can happen in between that isn't planned for, that you can then embrace. And that's where I think creativity really comes from. So we're gonna play one more song, okay? We'll just get right into it. This is a song called There Is No Greater Love. Let's see, do I have it here? I don't have it here. You guys know, you don't need the music for this one, do you? They know it. Yeah. We internalize all this stuff. So all the form and all the chords and stuff, you just swallow it and it just becomes part of you. So we're not thinking about the rules. We've internalized the rules. So we're going to play There Is No Greater Love, and let's go right into fours. So we'll do solos there, and then we could go, after you guys take a solo, then we can go right into fours after that. You got Daniel Mesto on tenor saxophone. Dave Lamb, that was Dave Lamb on guitar. And Adam Klaus on tenor saxophone. So I hope that was entertaining. I hope that was informative as well. And you know, if we think about our organizations, I think this isn't something that we have to embrace as creative design people, but I think organizations as a whole. And instead of thinking of command and control, hierarchy, top down, right? This is an orchestra conductor, right? 50, 60 people, you know, following the direction of one person. I think our organizations also have to change, and they have to change in their mindset. And it's really the mindset that I wanted to kind of convey to you, the fact that we got together here and hadn't rehearsed and gave a little performance for you, and the rules and the conventions and the patterns that have to be in place for that to happen. And you know, maybe our organizations should be more like a jam session, like we just did up here, right? Where we're allowed to be creative, and if we have the shared foundation, and then we have room for variation. Thank you very much.
Hey, Jim.
What do you got? What do you got? Can I get another yeah man for the guys?
Yeah, man. Yeah. Hey, that was really hip.
Okay, yeah, man.
Several cool questions. Sounds like experience plays a key role in pulling something like this off. Mm-hmm. How do you incorporate players with way more or less experience?
They have way more experience than I do. Like, they just suck me in. I know the rules. I know the rules.
You know the rules.
But they're way more experienced.
Okay.
They took me up under their wing and made me sound good.
Well, let's
It's kind of like the mistake is the opportunity. You know,
Yeah.
If you have somebody on the team who at least there's a baseline, right? You have to know the rules of engagement, but then you can think as a team. We're a team up there. And we actually didn't make too many mistakes. I almost wish we did, to see how we recover from it, because there's this whole rules of engagement around recovering from a mistake as well too. So if we made a mistake, it would have been a self-healing organization. We would have healed ourselves, even though we have different levels of experience.
So let's say I sat in with you.
We would make you sound good, Tom. You could
How?
Next time.
How though?
Next time.
Well, I think the question is really about for people who have much less experience, who may not be as familiar with the rules,
Yeah.
who maybe are a little nervous about making those mistakes and trusting the group.
Right, yeah.
How do you integrate that mindset, or those new people who are new into a software team, into the mix in a way?
You got to show them the rules. And I showed the picture of Art Blakey, the drummer, who's the leader of the band, sitting in the back of the band. And he didn't lead by getting up and yelling at people. He led by showing them the way. He showed them the way from the inside out.
Are you ever self-conscious about the level of quality of your solo?
Oh, my God.
As in, you may let the rest of the band down? Like,
I did.
What's your inner critic screaming at you while you
My inner
play?
critic is screaming, what the F are you doing up here with that solo? It was...
So even...
Oh, I'm never satisfied with my own solos.
Yeah. And well, now it's been broadcast all over the globe, so...
Yeah.
There's that.
You rubbing salt in my wound here?
Well, I guess I'm asking...
I feel bad right now, Tom, because I messed up my solos, and you're just rubbing salt into my wound.
I don't think that's Jim talking. I think that's your inner critic saying
It
something.
is my inner critic. But that's okay. It's okay to have an inner... Do you guys have inner critics, too? I mean, I think that's what that's what pushes you, right? Striving for better. And a lot of musicians are perfectionists, actually. Some of them are obsessed. I mean, to play instruments as good as those guys do, you have to be obsessed with minutia, fingering and tone and everything.
Well, it sounds like from your Herbie Hancock story, you remember that's the piano player who messed up or thought he messed up with Miles Davis.
Yeah.
It sounds like a key element is learning how to calm down and
probably
bounce back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Right.
And Slido, there's just a lot of love for what you did. So I'll just,
that's nice.
you know,
That's nice.
and Twitter too. So you can dig
Nice
that
to be
later.
loved.
One question is, can two players solo in parallel?
Yeah, sure. Of course, yeah.
How does that work?
They got to listen to each other. In fact, a lot of Dixieland, there are styles of jazz, like Dixieland jazz, where there's even more than two soloists soloing at the same time. And if they do it really well, so in Dixieland, you might have like a clarinet and a trombone and a trumpet. If they do it really well, it forms this counterpoint, where if they're all playing at the same time, then one of them probably has to sit out so the other can take the lead, and then the other takes the lead. So there's this undulation of coming together and going apart and constantly listening to each other.
Mm-hmm. So the key to doing that, and it's not for the beginners, is to really be better listener in some way.
You got to be a better listener. You also have to have a command of your instrument, so you're not listening to yourself, you're reacting to what you hear, and that comes out through your instrument.
Question, songs have sheet music.
Yep.
Some do.
Yeah.
What would you consider the equivalent when working in collaborative teams?
That's a really good question. Maybe something like a design brief, but certainly things like system libraries or pattern libraries, right? So you go into your pattern library and I need to make an error message, and there you have sheet music for an error message and components that you put into it, and that's kind of what we did here. That, you know, improvising jazz music is just one big pattern library that when you get to a certain level of musicianship, you hear things in the environment, TV show theme songs or other musicians, and then you assimilate those patterns. You hear patterns, and then you just take patterns of it, and then eventually it becomes your own style. But it's really just a ton of patterns that you recall spontaneously.
Jim, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Jim Kalbach, amazing.
Stage over here.